Greetings. My name is James Gould. For 35 years, I taught in the Department of Philosophy at a college in the suburbs of Chicago. I have an adult disabled son who lives in a group home nearby and attends a day activity program. Since my retirement 3 years ago, I have been active in disability advocacy within his agency and in the state of Illinois. I have written a number of academic articles on disability policy. That's a little information about me. The subject of my brief talk is the shortcomings of dispersed housing mandates. In developed nations, housing for adults with intellectual disabilities has shifted from institutions to the community. A recent American mandate, the Settings Rule, restricts funding to integrated locations with personalized supports. The regulation is beneficial in some respects, but multiple flaws suggest that it will not achieve its desired effects of inclusion and choice. Dispersed housing mandates are flawed in 4 ways. First, dispersed housing mandates use imprecise concepts. The definition of institution is unclear. Defining institutions by size, a facility of 4 or more people, is arbitrary, while defining them by experiences, segregated and standardized living, is better. But there is no necessary connection between size and the experience of residents. Dispersed homes may limit inclusion and independence, while congregate housing may promote them. The definition of integration is unclear. If integration means regular housing, then dispersed settings integrate. But if it means service practices that facilitate inclusion, many do not. The physical presence of disabled people in the community does not guarantee meaningful participation. The definition of community is unclear. Community is not physical, people living together, but psychological, a feeling of belonging. Internal community between disabled people differs from external community between disabled and non-disabled people. Isolated group homes may be lonely places without either type of community, while campuses may create both. Without clear definitions, it is hard for policymakers to compare different service options. Second, dispersed housing mandates rely on selective evidence. Integration policies overgeneralize by insisting that dispersed housing is always best. Deinstitutionalization research indicates that many people do have better quality of life in community settings. But the details are complicated. Dispersed housing has better outcomes than congregate housing in some domains, and similar outcomes in others. They offer different, although not inferior, quality of life. Residential outcomes are primarily influenced by service characteristics like staffing and personal characteristics of residents, not physical location. Integration policies oversimplify by using studies that combine different types of housing into 2 broad categories, dispersed and congregate, while ignoring the diversity in each group. This makes it hard to compare the pros and cons of particular settings. Integration policies dogmatize by ignoring the disadvantages of dispersed housing. Group home residents are often not integrated, and some are lonelier than people in congregate facilities. Mandates ignore the advantages of congregate housing. Intentional communities sometimes produce rich friendships and higher well-being than dispersed housing. Mandates ignore facts about relationships. Assuming that disabled people should be friends with non-disabled people disregards the idea that people prefer relationships with those who are similar to themselves. This is why group homes can produce isolation, while congregate settings create meaningful relationships. Finally, mandates ignore social barriers to inclusion. Placing disabled adults in mainstream society assumes it will naturally welcome them. But deinstitutionalization has not led to real inclusion, especially for individuals with high support needs. Policymakers should be aware of shortcomings in research data. Third, dispersed housing mandates compromise moral values. Dispersed housing policy violates autonomy. By narrowing the settings that receive funding, residential mandates contradict freedom to choose where to live. By refusing a spectrum of alternatives, one-size-fits-all approaches ignore the fact that people's needs vary and that dispersed and congregate housing offer distinct benefits that individuals should be free to choose. Dispersed housing mandates can cause harm. Despite increased community presence, deinstitutionalization has not achieved personal independence or meaningful community participation. For some people, congregate housing provides better quality of life, while group homes deprive them of friendship with disabled peers. Policymakers should consider the moral values at stake in residential policies. Fourth, dispersed housing mandates lack resources for implementation. Integration mandates often ignore financial resources. Regulations are typically unfunded mandates without money for implementation. Instead of providing more funds for the enhanced services they require, integration policies impose financial sanctions for failing to follow requirements. Dispersed housing mandates also ignore human resources. Frontline staff support is the single most important factor promoting inclusion and independence. But high vacancy and turnover rates have persisted for many years because agencies are not reimbursed enough to pay competitive wages. Integration mandates do not address workforce deficiencies. When making policy, officials must include resources for implementation. These limitations of U.S. housing mandates, imprecise concepts, incomplete data, violations of choice, harm to well-being, and lack of resources are relevant to other jurisdictions promoting community of living. Best of luck in your work to protect a wide array of housing choice in the UK. Thank you.